Hey Internet, this is Nate. You can also call me Nathan, please never call me Nathaniel, and welcome to an update on the 5 builds to make Seraph soil his armor. This is a video that I did back in February of this year, really just like weeks before the DLC came out. The focus was entirely around the new Exile champions that had come out with the Friends and Foes update. And I would say, in contrast to the 5 builds to make Seraph cry, all of which were using the original champions and struggled to adapt to the DLC, the new builds, all the Exile builds tend to work rather well, more or less unchanged from the DLC. Also, well, I'm glad that the spider trap build. What is this spider trap build you speak of? If you're thinking about the sneaky rat trap, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, so unlike the original 5 builds to make Seraph cry, these ones hold up a little bit better in the DLC. However, I'm still going to talk about a little bit how to adapt them and where I tend to go with them to make them work really well. It shouldn't be as long as the other one because we're not going to make as many changes, and I'm going to focus specifically on the best of the best ways to play. So let's just jump into it. We're going to start with the first build. It's the Imperial March build. So the Imperial March build uses the Shardtail Queen. You take Shardtail Queen. Typically, you go Imperialist and Imparade. I prefer Imparade 2 with Imperialist 1. You can also swap and go Imparade 1 with Imperialist 2. You don't take Royalty. Royalty is the Devil's choice. And basically, the idea is you utilize the fact that imps are cheaper. And also the one... oh, you mean... Yeah, Rat Trap build. We'll talk about that later. Utilize the one... The fledgling imps to get all of your scaling, and you utilize the Imperialist to clear backliners. So, again, relatively unchanged, but here are some things that I would recommend to make the strategy work really well. Starting with Hellhorn. You're not always guaranteed, but it's a pretty high likelihood you're going to get some imps in your run. The best ones you're going to want are Fledgling Imp, Welder Helper, and Transcend Imp, but really any of them can do. They all have different strategies you can work around. If you take Fledgling Imp, Armor Imp, one of the best things, especially if you have Imperialist, is to make sure that your imps get very thick, adding health. So you want health and you want endless. The reason that you want health is your imps only get to attack if they're in front of the Shardtail Queen. Also, they only will trigger the Imperialist active if they don't die. So by adding extra health to your imps, they're more likely to survive, and they're protecting the queen from taking damage. So you get a thick imp, you get endless on it, you put it in the front. Again, preferably it's like a fledgling imp or something with a welder helper infusion, and then you just keep replaying it over and over and over again on the same floor. You get a lot of good AoE damage. You start scaling your queen. What you can do then is either have 2 floors, and I can tell you some reasons why you'd want to have 2 floors, or you just have the single floor with your multi-striking unit behind your queen or your sweep unit behind your queen. That's the typical setup. Queen floor, either queen floor with a unit or queen floor solo with a second floor. So what are some reasons why you would want to have a second floor? 1, capacity. If you're nervous about taking extra capacity, like you feel like you need more draw, or you might feel like you need more ember, going a 2-floor setup can work really well. You would play your some imps on the floor with your queen, and you would play some imps on the floor with your other units. Good examples would be like also Apex Imp. So Apex Imp is an imp. So if you play it on the same floor as your queen, it's going to get yeeted by your queen, which is bad. You certainly don't want to do that. Something that, you know, I've done before. So don't do that. Don't follow my example. So in that case, you'd want your Apex Imp on its own floor, and then your Queen with its own floor. And your Queen kills the backliners, does some good AoE damage to the others, and then your, you know, Apex Imp floor kills the bosses and also scales on its own. That's like one example. But again, anytime you're worried about capacity, you can do this 2-floor setup. Other important things to note is Impish Scholar. So if you have Endless Impish Scholar, there's some fantastic consume spells within Hellhorn that can work really, really well. Alloy of the Ancients, Imp in a Box if you want to get insane amounts of imps. Last Stand, fantastic for like just doubling and doubling and doubling on your rage. One Horn's Tome, and then of course like good consume cards from other clans. So there's also some infinites. You can do things like with Awoken Hollow to be able to draw a whole bunch of cards every time you play your Apex, or every time you play your Impish Scholar. And by the way, you don't actually have to have Impish Scholar as a unit. Impish Scholar also has the same infusion. So if you want like a really kind of cool combo you can do is to get Pyre Chomper and then infuse an Impish Scholar onto the Pyre Chomper, so that every time you play it, you get Ember and you get back a card. Because oftentimes some of the best consume cards are going to be like 3 cost or even 5 cost, right? So by having both the Scholar and the Pyre Chomper, you get the Ember you need and you get the card you need to be able to play it again. And then, of course, Transcend Imp. It's another good reason why you want to take Imp Parade, is Imp Parade reduces the cost of Transcend Imp from 2 to 1, making it much easier to replay over and over and over again. So the whole build, again, revolves around playing Endless Imps, playing the Fledgling Imp that you generate out of your Queen's Imp Parade rank 2, and then doing AoE and scaling using your Imps. Okay? That's the core build. Everything else then revolves around that. So if we go to like artifacts, you're going to want number 1, Ashes of the Fallen. That's going to double all your summon triggers. Queen's Tail, allowing you to get Ember and draw out of your imps. Impsicle to get more imps. Railhammer to increase the amount of armor you get. Resonant Shard to increase the rage damage you do. All of that's going to be very, very solid. I also quite like Unbroken Horn, especially if you have a Pyre Chomper, because you can build up a lot of Ember and then dump it into some really, really good cards. That's basically the major ones you want with your kind of core here. Outside of that, -2 on Forever Flame, or Forever Flame tends to be really good. For Transcend Imp, you can get the marks are quite good with the Queen because she actually has pretty good base stats. Outside of that, nothing too crazy. One thing to note, Endless can be very tricky if you have Endless that's like generated. In particular, if you get the Broken Wheel into Immortality Potion event, be very careful. You can just literally just flood your deck full of Fledgling Imps that you're generating from your Queen, which can be pretty dangerous in case you need other cards to activate your stuff, right? So just be really careful about that. Otherwise, this build is pretty straightforward. It takes advantage of all of the bonuses to imps and imp essences. Anything else to note? Outside of that, it's really your secondary clan is almost going to be exclusively for their units. So let's talk about some of the best units you can use that go well with this build. It's going to be anything that has multi-strike, sweep, or a strike effect. So Horned Warrior, very good. Rail Beater, very good because of the melee weakness. Takes advantage of all that rage. Steelworkers, okay. Anything that's a bigger capacity unit tends to be a little bit of a struggle. So I would avoid things like Alpha Fiends, Demon Fiends. Apex Imp, very good, but just remember you need to play it on a second floor. Looking at then... Oh, I have uncommon. I meant to click unit. I was like, this is very confusing. So Apex Imp, very good. Deranged Brute, amazing to be able to increase the damage you're getting out of your rage. Then moving into Awoken. Animus of Will, very good. Both your sweepers. Shattered Shell, Husk Hermit, very good. Again, avoid those 3 capacity units so that you can fit more imps on the floor. Moving into Stygian Guard. Both sweepers, again, Cold Kalia, Icy Salafite, very, very strong. Your incants tend to be a little bit awkward because you're not really playing too many spells. You're mostly playing heavy units. So you might want to avoid taking a lot of like incant heavy stuff. Moving into Umbra. Umbra's a little bit of a weird one. You can do a 2-floor setup with Umbra where you have a queen floor and then a gorge floor. It's a little bit weird, but you can make those work. Outside of that, Morsel Maid tends to be pretty good because the advantage with Morsel Maid is that you can, or Morsel Maid or his infusion, is that you can gorge all your or all of your morsels first, and then still have capacity to play your imps afterward. So if you are going to go gorge, you're going to want to do something like Morsel Maid. Outside of that, I mean, you can get like infusions. Shadow Siege infusion's pretty good. Morsel Maker infusion is pretty good. Both of the Crucible Ward and Crucible Collector infusions are pretty good. But other than that, it's a little bit awkward. Going into Melting Remnant. Melting Remnant units, I mean, they're okay. What you need to make sure is if you're going to take something that has burnout, you have an extender. But other ones that are like actually quite good are things like Wickless Baron, Big Sludge. Even though I did mention taking 3 capacity units can be very risky, Big Sludge actually is really good if you can get the capacity, or if you can shrink him down to 1 capacity. Just because the rage scaling is just nuts when you have you know, your Imperialist killing off your imps every turn and killing the backliners. Other kind of cool things you can do is you can put the Tomb Essences onto imps so that you get the effect of the Extinguish trigger in addition to the imp itself dying due to Imperialist. So for example, you can put like a Molten Encasement onto like an armor imp or onto a fledgling imp, and then when they die, you get that effect on the whole floor. You get stealth on the whole floor, which is kind of cool. Melting Remnant also has a good advantage because of the spells. So the spells in particular, you can get stealth, you can get reform. Reforming your imps tends to be very good because they get stronger. They're less likely to die to hits. They can block for your queen and then do their AoE afterward. And finally, with Wormkin, again, any smaller units are going to be quite good. So eggs can be okay because they're both quite small. Your Glare Minder is going to be really good because Sweep is going to go really well with the Rage. Outside of that, not particularly amazing. And then in terms of like neutral units, Spike Driver Colony is insane because it already has multi-strike. It's small. You can fit multiple of them on the floor. Dante also very good because he's going to have a lot of multi-strike. Then you can scale up his multi-strike with a lot of Rage. Hef, okay, but you will have to wait until you get enough capacity generated on the floor to start taking advantage of all of that extra space. Okay, so that's basically it. We're going to jump into what I would say is the best combo here for the run, which is Shardtail Queen with Melting Remnant with Reform. And then we will be back with the next build. Back to the guide. So next up, we are going to cover the Wyldenten run, or Wyldenten build. It's the Rat Trap, Sneaky Rat Trap build. This one's pretty straightforward as well, similar to the last one. The idea here is that you get Strangler. Usually you want 1 rank of Strangler, 2 ranks of whatever else. So either you get rank 2 Predator and you have Quick and Multi-Strike, or you have rank 2 Thorn Lord to get more HP and also be able to scale up off of spells. Different ways to play the Rat Trap, but the whole thing comes down to sustain. The reason why it's so good is that Strangler has the root, which means that he will block the enemies from going to the next floor. And that essentially means that you'll never get pyre damage as long as your Wyldenten lives. So then the entire build revolves around what are the best ways to keep Wyldenten alive so that you can root all the enemies and kill all the enemies. So there are different strategies. Within Awoken itself, probably the easiest way is just to have a holdover Unleash the Wildwood. So you have Holdover, Unleash the Wildwood at 0 cost, and every single turn you heal up to full. That will enable you to defeat all of the units on basically any floor across any fight. The only issue is it won't defeat during Relentless, which is a big problem. So the other part of this build that's a big struggle is how do you not only keep Wyldenten alive to kill off all the units, how do you kill off the bosses at the end? So then you need to talk about scaling, and there's lots of different methods of scaling. One of the nice things about this particular run is that because you have Wyldenten, you also have Root Seeds. Root Seeds 1 cost, starter card, apply 2 damage, draw 1 card. So Root Seeds allows you to do a few things. One, because you have a starter card that enables more draw, you actually don't need to take extra draw artifacts from bosses. So you can fit more units on the floor. So if you think there's normally 5 capacity, if you add 2 extra capacity, you can fit 2 extra 2 capacity units on the floor with Wyldenten to try to get enough damage scaling. And then you just want units that are going to scale up rather well on their own. And there are lots of different ways you can try to do that. You can either just get big, thick units, or you can get things like Shattered Shell, which will scale its own damage as it kills things. You can get big multi-strikers that can take advantage of the Root Seeds. However you're going to do it, you're going to need to be able to scale that damage. The other one is Razor Sharp Edge. So you get a unit that has multi-strike or sweep, or even Wyldenten if you can't find anything better. And you play Razor Sharp Edge over and over and over and over again, scale up all that damage, and get ready for relentless combat. So there's 2, again, major components. Sustain and scaling damage enough to kill bosses. The other reason you want to scale damage enough is that there's a mechanic where if all of the units on the floor are rooted, and there would be on the next turn more than 7 units. So let's say you have 5 rooted at the top floor, and then 3 more come up. The last one of those 3 is going to skip the floor and go straight to the pyre. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Like if you have like a haste unit and the haste unit just drops over the top, like who cares? But if you're talking about like mini bosses from the Divinity fight, they'll just kill your pyre. So you got to be really careful that you're scaling enough that you can actually clear the floors to be able to kill, or so that you don't have things skip the floor and go straight to your pyre floor. The other part too is that as you're stacking up more and more units, you're going to be taking more and more damage. So sustain becomes harder and harder the more and more units that you have on the floor. So you got to be, again, very careful about how do you sustain and how do you get enough damage. Well, there's a couple of cheats for that. The number one is you take Melting Remnant. Melting Remnant is kind of a cheat for a couple of reasons. One, it has stealth. It has stealth in the form of Molten Encasement and has stealth in the form of, Engulfed in Smoke. If you have stealth, this now becomes not a regular Rat Trap build. This becomes a Sneaky Rat Trap build. Sneaky Rat Trap build, I think, is the strongest build in the entire game. It's the most reliable build at killing Divinity, even at unlimited shards. And the reason why is because the type of sustain that you get with stealth also sustains through bosses. If I have 20 stealth, that's 20 hits on the boss before they have a chance to actually combat. That's the first reason. The second reason is that you have Wickless Baron and Big Sludge. Now, Big Sludge, arguably tough to fit on the floor with Wyldenten. You have to get 2 extra capacity. But if you can fit Big Sludge or you can fit Wickless Baron, you're going to have a unit that not only is stealthed, but also scales as you're killing units. And because every single unit is guaranteed to die on the floor with Wyldenten, you also have guaranteed scaling on those units. So, like, Melting Remnant's just the auto pick. It's what you do when you go nuts. You play all your units out, or sorry, you play your Wyldenten, you play your Backliner, you play your Stealth Tomb, or you play your Engulfed in Smokes, and then you just blow out units every single turn. Super fun build. Really, really like it. It's what we're going to do for our run. But if you don't have Melting Remnant, you still want to make it work. You got to think about how am I going to keep my units alive and how am I going to scale them. If you do Hellhorned, you can do what I call Fast and Furious. So you can take Wyldenten, Predator, and then you just get like a bunch of Steelworkers or a bunch of Rail Beaters or something like that that scale really well, especially Steelworkers because they can give armor to the whole floor. You overstack with Hidden Passage or with Tiresome Climb. You get a whole bunch of units behind Wyldenten, and then Wyldenten makes sure that nothing ever leaves, and your other units help to kill everything and also to make sure that you have enough sustain. And then if you have this, again, still getting Unleash the Wildwood, but then you can mix in armor. So either armor from like Steelworkers or Marcher Shields or Branding Right's quite good. You can like double up like we did before with the Reinforce. And you can get Alloy of the Ancients. So all these different ways to get armor is another way to sustain through all the fights. With Stygian Guard, you can do the same kind of thing, only you can't overstack, but instead you get a bunch of like incant units. You take Thornlord, and then you just incant like crazy. So you can get things like Siren of the Sea, you can get things like Lodestone Totem, Eel Gorgon, anything that's going to incant really well is going to be great because Root Seeds is a great incant spell anyway. And then in addition, if you have Thornlord, you get the 3 stings at the start, so you get 3 incants right from the beginning. And then you just scale up your units, and then Thornlord just, or not Thornlord, then Wyldenten with Strangler just make sure that nothing ever reaches the pyre. Umbra, you use the Ember Drain package if possible, so especially Void Binding, very, very useful because you can stack a lot of damage shield on the Wyldenten. A damage shield very similar to stealth also is like a long-term sustain option. Plus you have options like Furnace Tap. You can get your rage scaling with Perils of Production. You can increase capacity with Space Prism. The only thing you don't really want to do with Umbra is try to do Gorges. But if you're just going to go for like, you know, solid units, or if you, I mean, you can do like Morsel Maid, and then you don't have to worry so much about, you know, positioning and things like that. But I would typically avoid Gorge if you have Umbra secondary and rather rely on your Awoken units. Or if you are going to Gorge, do something with Morsel Maid. And then just rely on the Ember Drain package to get your damage and sustain. We talked about Melting Remnant. And then with Wormkin, I actually really like eggs with this because Root Seeds is a great way to trigger eggs. Also, it'll enhance the eggs so that when they split, they keep the extra stats. Plus, you have lots of good options here like Echo Infusion, Echo Transfer, Soul Crushing Guilt. You have lots of ways to kind of get sustain, and you have like Force Contamination to get even more damage out on units. So there's a lot of good options here for sustain purposes as well. So with that, going into artifacts, biggest artifact you'll want is Emblem of Exiles. It's the best sustain option that you get out of the Awoken. Other options, Thornfruit tends to be quite good. And then, of course, if you have any stings at all, getting the sting enhancers can be quite good. Other good options, you can go things like Split Anvil, so that if you have something like the, what is it called? Cycle of Life, you have a good 3-cost spell that will make everything free and gives you more sustain through extra health. Daze on the top floor can also significantly improve your ability to sustain. Jack strips plus the where is it? Rules of Containment can help kill off backliners so that they won't hit your Wyldenten. Both marks are excellent because Wyldenten actually has pretty good base stats. And that's basically it. So you just want things that are going to protect Wyldenten, keep them alive, while Wyldenten keeps all the units on the floor, kills them off, and then prepares for relentless combat. All right, so third build. Stygian Guard build is basically the ultimate incant 2. It's the, Seraph the Mighty. Not Seraph. Solgard the Mighty. It's funny because when I first did this build guide, the #1 path for Solgard was Cold Channel. Since then, it's kind of tripped, or it's kind of switched up, where now Titan Channel is favored just because you like the big stats tend to be more valuable than Cold Channel, Dire Channel. You can still make Cold Channel, Dire Channel work, but they're certainly more complicated than Titan Channel. But the build here is all about using Titan Channel as your big blocker, and then getting solid units, typically sweepers and multi-strikers and incanters behind Solgard to take advantage of all of the incants you're going to be doing anyway to get Solgard phased in. So with that, it's more or less the same as what you would do before. You're gonna want to get your sweepers, so your Cold Celia, your Cold Kalia, your Icy Silophyte, or you get things like Siren of the Sea, Lodestone Totem, Eel Gorgon. You put them with Solgard, and then you just take advantage of all of the incanting that you can do. The biggest problem with the build is incanting fast enough that Solgard comes out. So it's very important that you really only do this build, or you go Titan Channel 3 only if you have a really good secondary clan. The best ones are going to be Hellhorned, Awoken, and Wormkin. Umbra tends to be pretty slow because you just have a lot of like morsel generation, which is, I guess, arguably okay. Plink is actually decent. Maybe you could put this in the same arena. It just doesn't have good units is the problem with Umbra. But yeah, I guess you could go Umbra. You could go... Yeah, it's probably mediocre. Melting Remnant, pretty bad because a lot of it is like reform and unit heavy. And unit heavy decks tend to be really bad with Solgard, especially Solgard Titan Channel. But again, the idea here, it's very similar to the Ultimate Incamp build we did last time. Except you don't want your big damage spells. Instead, you want a lot of 0 damage utility spells. So things like Frenzied Swarm tends to be very good, as long as you only have one of them and it's your final card in the deck. Siren Song can be pretty good. Deep Offering is pretty good. Making other spells 0 cost. Like the Offering combos are all very good. So getting Offering Token plus Crypt Builder, Guardian's Amulet, Titan's Tooth all tend to be very good. And then you want to take advantage of your secondary clan spells. So Woken, Root Seeds, obviously going to be very good. Restore, very good. Razor Sharp Edge, very good. Engraft is amazing. Stings can be pretty good. All your 0 cost stuff over here, Ensnares, Pyrogrows, things like that tend to be okay. Pyrogrows a little iffy because then you do lose some draw, but otherwise very solid. Wormkin, very similar. You have a lot of 0 costs. Your Broken Memories, Echo Infusions, Echo Transfers. Proclamation tends to be very good. Soul Crushing Guilt, Return Soul, allows you to get even more incants. You definitely want spell chains if you can get them, so you can get multiples of spells in the same turn. Anything you can do to try to get Solgard out as quickly as possible is going to help. And then, of course, your backliner. So out of Hellhorned, you typically are going to want things like Apex Imp, your Horned Warrior, maybe Rail Beater as well. Tends to be pretty good. You kind of want to avoid Imps. Imps don't typically go super well with Solgard because they slow down your incanting, and Solgard doesn't get affected by like summons until he's actually phased in. So you don't take advantage of all that very well. Awoken units, your Animus of Will, your Husk Hermit, Shattered Shell, all tend to be very strong. I would avoid the Hollows unless you have a restore, but you already have a giant unit in Solgard, so it's almost always going to be better that it has something that's a little bit more offensive than those units would be. Stygian Guard, again, Incanter Sweepers. Umbra, not really any good units, to be honest. So I wouldn't necessarily want to go Umbra with this combo, but if you get Umbra, you can try to make a 2-floor setup work where you can create all of your morsels on 1 floor and then play them on your gorge floor. That can be okay. And in that case, you'd want something that's going to do a lot of Either like the robot where you have a lot of multi-strikes, Morsel Made where you have a lot of flexibility in how you play, and then Shadow Eater to get AoE. Those would be your best picks in that case. Melting Remnant, there's not really any superbly great units. Yeah, nothing really amazing here other than just like the internal synergies of Melting Remnant, which are all quite strong. Wormkin, eggs tend to be very strong because you're incanting a lot. And root seeds, if you no, sorry, not root seeds, your foregone power also is infused, so you can get a lot of incants and then hatch your eggs. Sweep, so your glare miner tends to be pretty good. I also quite like getting a Keeper of Echoes in these builds. Any of those kinds of things can work really well. We're going to go with Awoken Secondary. Next up, we're going to talk about the Country Kitchen build. This is the Primordium build. The idea is you go 1 rank of Superfood and then 2 ranks of Stalwart Snack. So you have the chance to stack the most amount of buffs onto Primordium before Primordium then has, 8 turns of gorging. The other advantage of Superfood, and you want to get Superfood early if possible, is that you get the 10 extra health, which is really good for, first off, Primordium to sustain, and second, for then the unit that is gorging to take advantage of all of the extra health. Now, if you don't find any other way to generate protection onto Primordium, so if you don't get the Amber Drain package, so you have no Void Binding or anything like that, you don't get extra health, you don't have daze, you don't have stealth, armor, whatever, right? If you have no other way of generating sustain, you should go Superfood 2, potentially Superfood 3, because then you get the damage shield to protect Primordium, which will also then carry over to the unit that eats. So that's the idea. So what do you want to put? And maybe this is important to talk about. Primordium's status effects are all status effects, both positive and negative. So if you think about buffs, that's going to be Rage, Spikes, Multi-Strike, Armor, Sweep. No, not Sweep. You can't get Sweep. Trample, Quick. What else can you put onto a unit? Lifesteal, Damage Shield. All of those buffs, major buffs, you can put onto Primordium, and Primordium will give those to the unit. So the most exciting things are things like, the Multi-Strike, the heavy damage shields, the big rage damage. Like, those are like the most fun. On the other hand, every negative status effect also gets carried over. So that's Fragile, Melee Weakness, Sap, Ember Drain, anything else? Those are probably all the main ones. Frostbite, Reap. All of those are going to also carry over onto the units that are gorging off of Primordium. So you got to be careful. This means that Seraph the Temperate can be a problem if you're not buffing more rage than you're getting sap. You'll end up just sapping your unit to where it's not doing any attack. You can still do it, but again, you just need to make sure you are getting more damage out than you're getting lost. And as I said, you just need to be careful that your Primordium can survive through Divinity if you're going to be playing on the top floor. And if you're playing on the middle or bottom floor, it's less worrisome. You can put Primordium in the back and you're totally fine. Other things to be worried about is sweep units, spikes. They just destroy Primordium if you're not able to protect it somehow. So that's like the Primordium part. We talk about units that are good with gorging on Primordium. Robot can be really good, but you need to have Robot merged with itself so that you have the extra fuel, or you need to have double gorges, or you need to have enough space that you're regularly putting morsels out on the same floor. It's a real bad time when you put out your Primordium, you buff up your Alloyed Construct to like 11, and then it only has 1 fuel and dies because it doesn't get to attack anymore. So just make sure that if you're going to go Alloyed Construct, which I think is like the best one, best or second best, you do need to make sure that you either merge it onto itself so that it gets the double fuel, or you have double gorges. Morsel Made, also very, very good. The cool thing about Morsel Made as well is every time you play a morsel, it will gorge. It's also the negative thing about Morsel Made is that every time you play a morsel, it will gorge. So just be aware that you can actually eat your superfood too quickly if you're not careful. But it is a way to get like a massive amount of stats onto Morsel Made instantly. And by the way, it's not just Morsel Made, it's any unit that has the Morsel Made hunger as well. We'll do the same thing. Shadow Eater, also very good with Primordium, because you get the AoE, plus you're getting all the good stats into Shadow Eater, which already has strong base health. And then outside of like your units, it's all about the buffs. So Perils of Production, your main Ember Drain enabler, Immortal Trade can be quite good as long as you have a way to play out the rest of your unit. I mean, you got to be careful about Ember Drain. That's the one thing. Ember Drain is going to stack incredibly high with Superfood, so you just got to be cautious that you don't overstack the Ember Drain too much. But yeah, so your Rage, your Lifesteal, Void Binding is amazing because you get the damage shield and you get the Rage. Furnace Tap is amazing because you get multi-strike onto units. Grovel's quite good because you can get damage shield that then gets gorged. Trample, quite good. Damage shields from Gem Trove, also quite good. So anytime you can get any types of buffs are going to be really solid. That's within Umbra itself. Now, it's when you start combining with your secondary clans that there's some really neat stuff you can start doing. So here, there's more options for multi-strike with One Horn's Tome. You also get all of these Rage options with Ritual of Battle. You get Imp options. You can go Apex Imp and get like insane amounts of armor on your Primordium, which gets insane amounts of Rage onto Apex Imp. You can put a Deranged Brute up there to get even more value out of the Rage. Steelworker is very, very solid because Steelworker will add armor onto Primordium, which then gets scourged onto the Steelworker. So a lot of these things can be really cool because you can get insane amounts of Rage, armor, and then get like multi-strike, even though you get fragile. But if you have damage shield or armor, you're going to be just fine. That's with Hellhorn. With Awoken, your multi-strikers, your sweepers all love Primordium. You can also get like an Awoken Hollow, merge it onto itself, and then get insane amounts of heals. You increase capacity by 1, you put down your Primordium, you put down your Awoken Hollow, and then as you are healing your Awoken Hollow, you can get insane amounts of stats onto your Primordium, which then get eaten by the Awoken Hollow. So it's this like crazy cycle effect. You can also stack insane amounts of regen on a unit by restoring a whole bunch onto your Primordium. All those stacks get then added onto the unit, and then the unit has like insane amounts of regen, which is kind of funny. Spikes, so like Sharpen is really, really good because you get the spikes and you get the damage. All of them gets eaten by your Gorge unit. Quick as well. So all these different things. Spreading Spore is pretty good because you get regen and spikes. So all these things are really good ways to like buff up a unit to insane levels. With like spikes, damage, and regen. Stygian Guard, kind of a weird one. It's probably the least effective of all the clans with Primordium, but you still have 2 sweepers, and sweep is always going to be good. You can do like Guardian Stone to stack up armor, but outside of that, it's a little bit tricky because there's not really any buffs. It's all like aggressive, enemy-focused stuff. Eel Gorgon is also pretty good, similar to a sweep unit, because you're going to get probably lots of incants, and the stats from Superfood tend to be pretty good. You're getting 10 health per turn, some damage per turn, which is kind of nice. But in general, Stygian's probably the weakest secondary clan for the Primordium build. Melting Remnant pretty good because you can stack Burnout, so you can get things like Wax and Spike. You can put things like Wicklash. Even cooler, if Primordium happens to die before, you can reform Primordium, and then you get the extra stats, and you get the extra burnout you can add. So like a Paraffin Enforcer eating from a reformed Primordium is pretty sick. Legion of Wax, also a very good Gorger. If you can get like 1 burnout on a Legion of Wax, it's going to die, and then when you reform it, it keeps all the stats that it got. The one problem will be that you'll lose all of the buffs that you got, so just be aware of that. But like from a stat perspective, that's pretty cool. Wicked Blaze, very good for reforming Primordium, and so on. Also to note, I didn't talk about it, but your Wretch, going to be one of the best spells you can get as a way to reform Primordium and bring it back. So then you can buff it again, gorge off of it again. Wormkin, also very good because of all the stat options. You have Echo Infusion, you have Echo Transfer, Echoes of the Past, all ways to buff up your Primordium. Perfect Insanity, great buff for Primordium. That's a joke, by the way. And then, yeah, I mean, eggs are really good to gorge with because they're, especially like Bog Chrysalis, because then both flies get the benefit from all the gorging. Although be careful about the buffs, because the buffs will go away. Better probably is just Glareminder because Sweep is so good. Or any of your other stuff, like Shardtail Carver's pretty good as well. First of Kin, because it has good base stats, then you can just buff it up a lot. So it kind of depends, but typically Sweep is going to be good, Multi-Strike is going to be good, Trample is going to be very good, and most of that you can get self-contained within Umbra itself. So it's really all about getting those like really solid, rare Umbra cards that give good buffs, like Furnace Tap and your Umbra Stone, and then just building around getting all the buffs you can and protecting Primordium. In terms of artifacts, Double Gorge going to be very good, specifically if you have the robot or if you have any of the other Gorge triggers. Mind Jacks is very good to get extra space. Chain of Gems is really good to get extra damage shield onto Primordium right from the beginning. If you are going to go Gorge, you're going to want things like Wing Technology or Chain of Gems, just to make sure that the morsels are going to live long enough. From other clans, anything that gives stats. So Emblem of Exiles, Mark of a Champion is probably not so good, but Mark of an Exile can be pretty good. That'll get you 15 base health more if you have other options as well. I do like Conscription Notice, especially early. It's a 1 capacity unit that's going to be a pretty good gorger most of the time. You also have your other stat increases. So where are they? Your Worn Grindstone for extra damage. Where is it? Where's the health one? There we go. Hammer chest plates, also very good. If you get armor, getting like Railhammer, Scorched Steel, also going to be very solid to start things off with. Yeah, I think that's basically it. All right. Now on to the final build. So in this case, there are some changes, but it's like more tactical changes than strategic changes. So the last one is the Little Icarus build. And the idea is, how do you make Little Icarus strong all the way up through Divinity? So Little Icarus, again, if you're not aware, every time something dies or it gets slain by Little Icarus or by Little Fade, you gain spikes and damage permanently for the rest of the run. And it increases with the number of ranks. So Little Icarus is all about timing and about tactical play. And the number of kills you need has increased compared to what you needed pre-Divinity, because you need to be able to kill at least 200 health units with spikes, and ideally it's 250 to 300 health units with spikes in order to be able to make it work. The other major issue with Little Fade right now with spikes or Little Icarus is the health. You have 4 or 5 units that are all doing like 20 damage, 16 damage, 18 damage. They're going to kill Little Fade in the first hit, and even if you play Little Fade in every floor, you're just not going to scale fast enough with health to keep Little Fade alive long enough. So 2 different clans can help with that. One is Wormkin. You can get Echo Infusions and just stack Echo Infusions onto Little Fade early on to get enough health to be able to survive some of the more difficult floors. The other is with Awoken, and you take a mix of Steel Enhancer and Cycle of Life. Those would be the 2 main ones. I think Wormkin's definitely more reliable. This is one we're going to go with in this build. You do miss out on some cool stuff if you don't take Awoken. So, for example, we aren't going to be able to get Adaptive Mutation, which is like insane. We aren't going to be able to get Cycle of Life. We're not going to be able to heal or get extra spikes. And we're not going to be able to get spike buffs, which all is really good, arguably. But I think the Echo Infusion is so important to help you with getting kills with Little Fade that we're going to go with Wormkin instead. Hellhorn, Stygian Guard, Umbra, good luck. You can certainly do it. You can do things with armor and with damage shield to make it work, but it's a lot harder. I think with Wormkin and Awoken, you have the best shot of actually having your Little Fade basically solo all of the floors. And that's what we're going to try. So we're not going to take any secondary unit at all. We're going to go for a clean, complete, full-on Little Icarus run. In terms of... oh, actually, let me go back into Logbook. In terms of other things that are quite good as far as relics go, Emblem of Exiles is pretty good if you go Awoken. Carving Karuska, very good if you're going to go with... Carving Karuska and Base Charge, very good if you're going to go with Wormkin. Outside of that, yeah, I mean... Memorial Fund is pretty good for extra money. But the biggest thing that you're going to need is consistent reform. So being able to get extra draw and reduce the cost of your reform is going to be the biggest thing. Resonant Block is okay early. It's not so great late. Votive Key is okay, but it's a little dangerous just because of the fact that you don't gain extra health. So with that, as I said at the beginning, compared to the 5 builds to make Seraph cry, the 5 builds to make Seraph soil his armor holds up relatively well going into the last Divinity DLC. You do have to make some minor adaptations. You need to think about scaling a little bit more than you did in the past with these builds. But all of them are completely viable. 2 of them are I think the 2 best builds in the game, the Imperial March and the Sneaky Rat Trap. Both are just absolutely insane. Little Icarus, as we saw, totally viable. You can play literally only Icarus and win. Certainly we had that was very favorable how that ended up, but I mean, it worked. And as long as you don't, rush, take too many shards early, you should be totally fine. Yeah, in general, it also shows that the Exile champions, I think, are in a much stronger spot than the standard champions, who a lot of them just are getting outpaced by Divinity and by all of the shard enemies and by Seraph. So, yeah, I mean, not all of them. I mean, certainly Rector Flicker with Dark Calling is still pretty good. The Sentient is still pretty good. Tethys with Conduit is pretty good. But there's these are some examples compared to the, Penumbra is just bad. Hornbreaker Prince is just kind of bad. So I would say by and large, yeah, Exile is definitely the way to go. And apart from that, hope you guys enjoyed this kind of update to the guide. Certainly a much better attempt than the first attempt I did at making this guide. So appreciate those that joined both. Got to see me lecture on both again. But I think this time was a lot smoother. We had a lot better runs. And with that, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.